my name is Arielle. Welcome to my channel. If you're new here, and you probably are, I am a recently accepted medical student. In this channel and in my videos, I'm sharing all of my tips and suggestions and just experience of what I've gone through to get to this point, and also some of the big topics that I have gone over with students as a pre-med advisor. So please subscribe to this channel if you'd like to see more content relating to how to prepare to apply to medical school and what medical school is like and everything in between. So in this video, I'm going to outline 5 MCAT study tips that I think are universally applicable to any student starting to study for the MCAT. Implementing these study tips into your routine of studying will help you improve your test score, because it certainly helped me improve mine. One of the biggest things that I was asked as a pre-med advisor in college was, how do I study for the MCAT? It's a daunting task. It is one of the barriers to entry of medical school that many pre-medical students have a lot of anxiety about, and it's completely understandable. It's a huge test. It's probably the biggest test you've ever taken, and there's a lot riding on this test. The stakes are high. I just want to preface this video by saying this is not a video on how to score a 99th percentile on your MCAT. There are plenty of videos on YouTube that do go into that and go into different YouTubers' experiences with the MCAT and how they studied to obtain a score like that. Although those videos definitely can be helpful for some, I know everybody has a different study strategy, and that certainly holds true for me. So the reason why I think some of these videos that go into how to get above a 520 MCAT score or an outrageously high MCAT score can sometimes be problematic is because everybody's study strategy is different and unique. And one thing that works for somebody will not necessarily work for somebody else. I think a lot of students run into trouble when they start watching videos or reading content that goes into how I got a 520 plus on my MCAT, because then they get roped into this mindset that this is absolutely what I have to do to get this score. This is what this person did to get this score. And I think it's much more complicated than that. It's very important that you sit down before you start this lengthy process of studying and determine what study strategy you've used up until this point and whether or not that's worked for you. So that's just what I will say right off the bat before I get into any of these tips. Sit down and figure out what study strategy works for you, or you will be in a world of hurt once you start preparing for this exam and realize that you don't study like everybody else you've talked to. My first tip for today is make a plan and create a schedule. So this seems very obvious. Why am I saying make a plan and create a schedule? That's probably something you already do if you've gotten to the point of taking the MCAT. In rigorous science courses that you need to take before starting medical school, you've gotten used to scheduling things in, scheduling in your study time, your exams, everything. It is so crucial that if this is not something that you already do, that you sit down before you start anything and outline what you're going to do on your timeline to prepare for this exam. So that includes your start date, when you're going to start studying for the exam, and saying to yourself, okay, how long do I want to prepare for this exam? And that's another question I get often, is how long should I give myself to prepare for this exam? And there's no black and white answer. It varies for every student. So I know people that have studied for 2 weeks for this exam, which is, let me just say, that is not common, but I have seen it. And I also know people that have studied for the MCAT for in excess of a year. So the timeline is so variable on your study strategy, your knowledge base, how comfortable you feel with the material, and how prepared you are for the exam once you start going into practice materials and getting a feel for what this test is going to be like and what content's going to be on the exam. So just to give you an idea of what this tip looked like for me when I used it, when I first started studying, is I picked my start date. When is a good time for me to start studying for this exam? And for me, that was during my senior year of college. I knew that if I started any sooner than this, then I would not be able to put the effort that I felt that I needed to into studying for this exam. So typically, if you're on a traditional track, students will take the MCAT exam in your junior year of college, the summer after your junior year. And that was originally what I was planning, but once it got closer, I just realized I could not dedicate the time necessary to do well. So I put it off until my senior year and decided that I was going to take a gap year and study for the exam my senior year and take it the summer after I graduated college. So what my study schedule looked like is I started studying in the fall of my senior year. So I marked that on the calendar. This is the date that I'm starting to study. And every single day I would block off time on my schedule for studying. And I just did that before I even went into figuring out what content I needed to study. I just blocked off time to study. So that's the first thing that I would recommend doing. The next thing I would recommend doing is figuring out how many full-length exams you're going to take before you take the actual exam. And also block those off on your calendar. This is extremely important because those full-length exams are really going to give you a familiarity with the MCAT, and taking these exams throughout your study timeline are going to help improve your score tremendously. And I'm going to go into that a little bit more in a tip a little bit later on in this video as well. The other thing that you should definitely add to this timeline for yourself is what date you're planning on taking the exam. And if you're giving yourself a while to study, for example, I started in the fall. I didn't take the MCAT till the following summer, so I studied for about 8 to 9 months for this exam, which is definitely on the longer side. Although I will say I did not dedicate 8 hours a day to studying for the MCAT like some people do. Some people decide to take 3 months to study for this exam, and they study 8 to 12 hours a day. That's not what I did. On the low side, I would study maybe an hour a day, and then I think as I got closer, I would take more, like 4 or 5 hours a day to study for the MCAT, but I don't think I ever sat down for 6 to 8 to 12 hours at a time to study for this exam because I just didn't think that would be sustainable for me. So once you're done with tip number 1, that is the very first thing I would do when you start preparing for the MCAT before you even open a book. My second MCAT study tip is decide on a prep company or lack thereof. What I mean by this is a lot of students decide to take a prep course, an MCAT prep course. And these are extremely helpful for individuals that are not necessarily extremely self-motivated to the point that they can get themselves to study and organize their own content to study for the MCAT exam. And this is the majority of students that I've talked to. The majority of students and friends that I know that have studied for the exam have decided to take a prep course. They are expensive. That is one thing to keep in mind, is the expense of these prep courses can range anywhere from a few $100s to thousands of dollars. So it's also important to evaluate your budget and decide whether or not you do want to spend that much money on a prep course. The other alternative is to use Google and use online sources. I've seen a lot of great content compiled by students on sites like Reddit. So there's definitely a plethora of content out there if you do decide not to take a prep course, either for financial or just personal preference reasons. So I used a lesser known prep course to study for my MCAT exam. I think it's gaining more familiarity. It's called Altius Test Prep, and I was extremely impressed with their program and would absolutely recommend it to anybody who is starting to study for the MCAT or who's just starting to look into it. And I'll link down below to their website where you can look and see what they're offering in terms of test prep options. In my test prep course, they also included AAMC practice material, which was extremely important for me as I was preparing for this exam. That AAMC prep material is crucial. So make sure that whichever prep course you take, they do include it, or if it is an extra cost, I would pay a little bit extra for it, or you can go directly through AAMC and purchase those practice materials. And I'll also link that down below. Most people are probably familiar with this already, but if you're just starting out and gathering information, hopefully this is helpful for you. Once you pick a prep course or lack thereof, you're going to circle back to tip 1, which was make a plan and create a schedule, and you are going to add in all the different modules included in that prep course, or all the different topics that you need to study on your self-planned preparation, and add it into that schedule, and just make a rough guess of how much time it's going to take you to prepare on each of these topics. And it's definitely going to vary, and be flexible with your schedule, although don't be flexible with the amount of time you study per day. It doesn't necessarily matter what you study as long as you're studying something, getting into the routine of studying every day. The repetition of that and the routine it gets you into are crucial to ensuring that you retain this information long term. My third MCAT study tip for today is utilize AAMC resources. And this is something I touched on in my previous tip. This is huge. There are so many students I've talked to that did not utilize AAMC's practice materials and just relied on outside test prep companies' full-length exams and questions to prepare for their exam. AAMC is the creator of the MCAT, so it only makes sense to at least incorporate some of their materials into your study plan. Another thing I would say about AAMC's resources are that their question bank and their practice materials are sometimes more difficult than the actual exam, but it's a very good way to gauge your knowledge base on the content that you will be tested on to see what areas you need to go back and review and study more. AAMC study resources are crucial because they provide full-length examinations that mock up what the MCAT will be like when you actually take it. The interface is the same as what you will experience on test day, and seeing that and getting a feel for what it will look like exactly, what the buttons look like, what the highlighting tools are, and what's available to you on the computer desktop while you're taking this exam is really important. And it was extremely important for me, and it might not be to everybody else, but I really needed to know exactly what I was going to experience when I walked into that room. I was spending months preparing for this huge exam, and I wanted to make sure I knew exactly what I was walking into. So AAMC's practice exams were extremely important to me as I was preparing to take the MCAT. At the time that I took the MCAT, there were only 2 full-length examinations available through AAMC that they had put out. They usually release about 1 per year. The 2015, the new MCAT, was just released about a year or 2 before I took it, so there were only 2 full-length exams available. I think there's a lot more available now, and again, that link will be in the description below to where to go directly through AAMC to get this material if you're not already familiar with it. The 2 exams that I took, my score on the actual MCAT on test day ended up being the average of the 2 full-length AAMC examinations that I took. So it is an extremely good indicator of what you are going to score on test day. And this will go into some of my tips later on in this video about knowing whether or not you're ready to take the exam. And I would use them as your indicator. On the other hand, a lot of test prep courses offer their own full-length exams, and these I've found not to be the most accurate. Not everybody's experience is the same, and I'm sure there's many students that have found different test prep companies' exams to be fairly accurate in gauging the results, which is great. But I think that the best indicator for knowing around approximately what score you are going to score on test day is going to be those AAMC exams, and I would highly recommend that for that purpose. My tip number 4 for my MCAT study tips is dedicate time to review your practice exams. Dedicate time to review every single practice exam that you take. This is so important. In addition to this, thoroughly review those practice exams. I cannot tell you how important this is and how many students I've talked to that do not take the time to do this. This is one of those other things that should be put into, back what I was talking about with tip number 1, put it into your schedule. What I found for myself is I needed about 2 to 4 days after taking a full-length exam to go back and review that exam. So make sure you go and put that in your calendar when you start creating your schedule, and just know that you should set aside 2 to 4 days to go back and review every single question on the full-length exam that you took. Just another note to throw in here, I think I took about, I would say 8 to 10 practice exams before I took the real MCAT, and I would absolutely recommend that to everybody watching this video. I would recommend taking no less than 6 practice exams. So what I want to mention here too is review every single test question, regardless of whether you got it right or wrong. There are so many test questions on this exam that you may have guessed and just happened to get the answer correct since it's a multiple choice exam. And you really want to go over every single question so that you know, do I truly know this content, or is it just something that I happen to guess correctly on? Because you do not want to be going into test day riding on the hope that I'm going to guess and get every question that I guess correct, because hope is not a strategy. So review every single question, and the more the better. I don't think that a day used to take a practice exam and those 2 to 4 days used to review that practice exam after you take it are days wasted. They are so crucial to applying the knowledge that you are studying, the content that you're reviewing, and seeing how do I actually use this content to answer test questions, and can I do it in a timed setting where I'm sitting taking an exam for hours on end. So it's very important to take these exams. I'll say it a million times. It is so important. Do not take the MCAT without taking a sufficient number of practice exams. Tip number 5 for my MCAT study tips, my last tip is when you do those practice exams that I have just talked about, take them like you are actually going to take the exam. Don't just roll out of bed at noon and say, okay, I'm gonna take my practice exam. Typically when you take the MCAT exam, it starts early in the morning, around 7:30 in the morning. So just to give you an example of what I did in practice, I would wake up at 6 o'clock and I would make breakfast, exactly what I was planning on eating for test day. Before I went to bed the night before the morning I was going to take the practice test, I would pack my lunch that I was going to eat during each break. I ate the same thing. I ate a lox and bagel, I had a yogurt, I had an apple, and a sandwich. Every single time I took my practice exam, I would pack the same thing for snacks and make the same thing for breakfast every morning. And what I would do is I would have my bag packed, I'd get in the car, and I drove to the university campus where I was going to be taking my MCAT exam, and I went to the library there. And a lot of libraries have the cubicles, and I would go find a cubicle in the depths of the back of the library and park myself there and set up my laptop, and that is where I would sit and take this exam. I would start at the exact time that I would on actual test day. I would not let myself eat any snacks unless it was a break. I think they allow water in the testing area, so that's the only thing I would have next to me, not coffee, nothing else. If I needed coffee, I would drink that during a break. And I would time myself and make sure that I was staying right on track with each section and then with the breaks. And I wouldn't give myself any extra time during the breaks, because you don't get any extra time on test day. When you go to the testing center, they'll lock you out if you're not back before you need to be for your breaks. If you apply this to your study strategy, this is probably one of the biggest things all around that really helped me feel confident and prepared for the actual exam, is doing these mock test days. Preparing like every single time I took a practice exam, it was the real thing, and that the score I got on this practice exam was going to be the score that I was going to get on the actual MCAT. So I hope these 5 tips have been helpful. Please let me know in the comments down below if you have any specific questions in regards to any of these 5 tips. And I also just wanted to throw in a little bonus tip. Bonus tip 5A or tip 6, just for anybody who's stayed with me through the entire video. My bonus tip is don't be scared to push back your exam. I have never talked to any student or pre-med friend who was disappointed or regretted pushing back a test date that they didn't feel prepared for. And I say that to every student who I talk to who's looking for advice on how to begin preparing for this exam is, if you get to the point where you're 2 or 3 weeks out and you don't feel like you're going to be scoring well, going back to my tip previously, if you're taking those AAMC exams and you're not scoring anywhere near the range that you're hoping to score for the actual test day, don't be scared to push it back. You will regret more not pushing your test back than pushing it back a few weeks or a month or even a few months. Don't be scared to do that. Thanks so much for watching this video today. Please let me know in the comments down below if you have any questions in relation to any of the tips I went over today, or any other questions about how to prepare for medical school, how I got to the point of being accepted to medical school, or anything in between. Just let me know in the comments down below. If you liked this video, please like and subscribe if you'd like to see more content relating to everything medical school related.